You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We love MotoGP.
Hello and welcome to Missed Apex MotoGP Podcast. This is a show put together by MotoGP fans pretending to be experts. We aim to have a race review show ready for your midweek commute. We may just be punters, but we love to talk. A bit of a different show for you today, and a show that we hope will encourage some new people to give MotoGP a go and realise what an amazing spectacle they're missing out on. If you're an avid MotoGP follower and a regular listener to this pod, then this probably isn't the show for you. This show is aimed at our four-wheeled friends or anybody curious to dip their toes into the crazy world of bike racing. So, here's an intro to MotoGP for the bike curious. As ever, I'm your host, Kyle Power, and today I'm joined by our very own recent convert to the dark side, Matt Trumpets. How's it going, Matt?
Two wheels or go home. It's going great. I'm so excited about this show, Kyle.
Yeah, same here. I'd love to encourage more people to come and watch it. So you were a new fan last year. You watched it avidly last year. And how was your experience for your first season on two wheels?
Well, I mean, I will say as a Formula One fan, it wound up being a pretty good Formula One season, but there's nothing on four wheels that can compete with two-wheeled racing. And yes, I know I'm a bit biased as a former bicycle racer, but it's astonishing once you start watching the skill and the talent and just the risk that these riders take every weekend they race.
Absolutely. So let's jump straight into it and let's give hopefully these new potential fans an overview of what MotoGP is. So MotoGP, and I'm going to make no apologies in this show, there's going to be lots of Formula One comparisons because we're assuming most of the listeners to this podcast will know a bit about Formula One or come from the main show. So MotoGP is basically the two-wheeled version of Formula One. These bikes are pure prototypes. They have had money thrown at them aplenty to make them the fastest bikes possible around a circuit on Earth. This is absolute prototype. These bikes are insane. Now, comparison to Formula One, they're actually higher top speed. And as in racing, everything is mainly power to weight ratio. So just to give a bit of an overview, an F1 car is typically about 1,300 brake horsepower per ton, which is bonkers. But a MotoGP bike is about 1,700 brake horsepower per ton, which is insane. Absolutely incredible. They also have carbon brakes, Matt. So these things are like ballistic missiles.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up the brakes because as someone who used to race bicycles, one thing I can also tell you is the contact patch. The bit that connects the bicycle to the track is insanely tiny compared to that of a car. And this was something I'd run into as a bicyclist. Just not like cars would stop and you wouldn't be able to stop your bike because you don't have the connection with the pavement. That much power, those kind of brakes, and that tiny a connection to the track, it's just mental.
Yeah, and you do see crashes like that, them locking the front tyre and going down. And that's another thing different from MotoGP bikes is they have independently controlled front and rear brakes. So they control them independently to riders. And yeah, watching the riders that are godlike heroes wrestling these monsters around the track, all whilst passing handlebars and racing is absolutely incredible. So there's typically lots more overtaking versus F1.
Yeah, and right away we're into it. Like in Formula One, the engineers make brake shapes you have your balance that can shift from front to rear. You can change that. On a motorcycle, it's all being done by feel by the rider at over 200 miles an hour into your fastest corners. And if you get it the slightest bit wrong, you're going on a lengthy trip down the asphalt slide.
Yeah, definitely. And that's brilliant because it brings me on to the point I've got noted on the bullet point here that the riders actually make more difference comparative to the machinery than they do in Formula One. Now, I'm going to create some figures here. This is purely from my own head, so don't shoot me. But I think, in my opinion, in Formula One, it's 95% car, 5% driver to actually get where the performance is. Whereas in MotoGP, I think it's more like 70 or 60% bike and 30 or 40% rider. The rider makes that much of a difference. Of course, the equipment is still a defining factor, but the rider and the bravery and the risk and the feeling, they can make so much more difference on the thing versus drivers in a four-wheel car.
Well, yeah, and this is the thing. This is one of the things that really does attract me to it, is because the rider is so much more important in the overall formula. You have more competition. You don't have your Michael Schumacher and Ferraris with one rider going away with everything on any given weekend under any given circumstances. You might see a different manufacturer, a different rider, or a different team just nail their setup and their rider be happy and go and win a race where you wouldn't expect to see an Alpine or a Haas win a race. Well, in MotoGP, that can happen on a relatively regular basis, depending upon how close the bikes are.
Yeah, and that is absolutely true. You do get the odd standout freak performance, and ends up being not that odd. You get it a few times a season where you'll have a rider just hooks up, finds a great feeling and puts in an outstanding performance to nab a win. You could never envisage that sort of stuff happening in F1. So there are quite a lot of comparisons, and that's a brief overview of MotoGP, but it runs over this season. It's going to be running over 22 rounds, and the points are similar to F1, but they go from 25 for first and cascading down to 15th place.
Yeah, and the only other thing I really want to bring up here, because I know we have a lot to get to today, is how often have you sat there and gone watching, say, Monaco? I wish they had smaller cars. The beauty of bike racing is that these things are tiny. They don't even weigh 200 kilograms, and they can go through turns side by side, turn after turn, dueling with each other, lap after lap. I have never seen, and it's beautiful. You can see different bikes and the way they go through corners. It's so much easier to see than when you watch Formula One. It's just brilliant. If you like that kind of battling, if you like that sort of combat in your motorsports, then, oh yeah, no, you got to start watching it because it's just insane.
Awesome. And that's a very good point to move on to the next bit, because it does lend itself. It is much more conducive to side-by-side racing than car racing or F1 will ever be. And so we'll go to the weekend structure now. And MotoGP runs quite differently to F1. And any of you listeners to the main Missed Apex show will know I've been very outspoken against the sprints in Formula One. I hate them, but there are sprints in MotoGP. And the aforementioned, like Matt's just said, the racing, they work fantastically for MotoGP. The sprints really work, and they actually played a huge part in the championship last year. And the difference with MotoGP is there is a sprint at every round. It's consistent. The weekend structure is consistent throughout the year. And it's actually structured in a way which I really, really love, because practices aren't just practicing for the hell of it. The practices actually mean something, and they all add up, and it builds up for the rest of the weekend. And I'll explain how that happens now. So on the Friday, you get free practice one. Now, free is an important word. So this is a free session. The times don't matter. The riders just get themselves dialed in. But after that, there is practice. Now, this actually counts. The top 10 times in practice go straight through to Q2 in qualifying. Now, unlike F1, qualifying is split into only 2 sections and not 3 segments. So the first segment, Q1, is for everyone who didn't make it into Q2. So it's and Q2 is for the top 10 fastest times in practice. So if you go for your practice on a Friday, you get in the top 10, you don't have to bother with Q1 in qualifying, you progress directly through to Q2. So we move on to Saturday. There's free practice 2s, that's another free session in the morning. And then it goes on to Q1. So all of those people outside of the top 10 in practice, they go and shoot it out in a qualifying session. A bit like Formula One, they get a limited amount of time. They can do as many laps as they like, but the top 2 from that session progress through to Q2. So it goes on to Q2. So that's the top 10 from practice, and the top 2 from Q1 all go and shoot out for pole to set the grid. Then on the Saturday, after all that action, it's then on to the sprint race, which is a half race distance and half points, scoring down to 9th place. Then on the Sunday, they get a quick 10-minute warm-up just to get the feel and get adjusted. Then it's on to the main event over a series of laps, which usually lasts about 40 to 45 minutes. This is usually about half the length of a Formula One race, Matt, which again, I find fairly appealing, particularly when there's a heavy weekend of motorsport.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have put your finger right on one of the best things about it is you have a full weekend of action. And it's very consumable. If you're a busy person, this is very consumable. The sprint races are not that long. And even the Grand Prix are roughly half the amount of time to watch a Formula One Grand Prix. And that's if you skip all the practices and stuff like that. So it makes the action more concentrated, and it makes it a bit easier to follow, I find, across the weekend. But you didn't mention the most important thing about why you like the sprint races. And this is why I like them, is unlike Formula One, where if Lando Norris has the fastest practice time and he wins pole position and qualifying for the sprint, he wins the sprint, and then he goes on to win the Grand Prix the next day. That happens a lot. But this is absolutely not the case for reasons that I'm going to spell TIRES. You can get wildly differing results between your sprint races and your Grand Prix. And for teams that are clever about it, they can pick the one or the other and use them to make a real championship run. They absolutely matter. And I know we'll talk about it later, but you can't ignore the sprint race nearly as much as you can in Formula One right now. And you get different results and you see different battles, and people will throw away good position. It's just, it's a completely different animal, and you really need to watch a couple to understand how different and how amazing it is. They've just got the whole weekend rolled out for you, and none of it is boring.
No, I completely agree. And I was a little bit against this when they first reeled this out. It's only been a couple of years, but it works. It just works. It builds up nicely, and it's something I wish Formula One would follow. I like the weekend build. So the weekend structure is really good. So it culminates in the MotoGP, the main race, 25 points for a win, scores all the way down to 15th place. There's 22 riders in the field this year, and they'll all be riding various bikes. So let's move on to the equipment and the manufacturers that are in the sport. So there's 5 main manufacturers in the sport. Now that might seem pretty low. You're like, oh, there's 10 Formula One teams. There's only 5 MotoGP manufacturers, but there are more teams. So there are some quirks. And well, we'll do this bit first. So there are now customer bikes. So the main manufacturers will build their bikes and their prototypes, and they'll have a deal with some other teams that they'll get the full factory spec, the full version of it, and they'll basically hire out those bikes. So there's more than one. There's multiple manufacturers running in different liveries and run by different teams, and it's actually fascinating. So we'll go over the manufacturers. The first one we should speak about is Ducati. They're the current dominant force. They've moved the sport on rapidly in recent years, bringing in huge emphasis on aero and the gadgets, and that's a different thing in MotoGP. This isn't so as restrictive as Formula One. There are obviously technical regulations, but there's a bit more room for manoeuvre and interpretation. So Ducati have brought shape-shifting, ride height devices, aero, all these good stuff like mass dampers to it. They've brought all these cool gadgets and they've moved the sport on. So Ducati are the force to be reckoned with in MotoGP at the moment. They're the red bikes. They're like the Ferrari of the bike world. Beautiful Italian exquisite. Another beautiful exquisite Italian bike is Aprilia, a very small factory working out of Noel, but they are very, very good, and in my opinion, the best looking bike on the grid, and they're coming quite good. Got another European manufacturer, which would be unfamiliar to car racers, which is KTM. They've got potential, they've got a great young talent, but they're in a bit of money trouble at the moment, but their bike is pretty cool. Then we have the 2 Japanese manufacturers, Yamaha, and they're on their way back up after a couple of years in the doldrums, and then at the back there's Honda, who are fighting to try to recover themselves back. Now, these 2 manufacturers fell behind the European manufacturers when Ducati moved it on, and they kind of got left behind. They used to dominate the sport, but now they've been left behind, and they're scrabbling to try and catch back up. So MotoGP have created what we call concession rules. So teams that haven't been doing very well, and it's namely just Yamaha and Honda now, both have concessions. So they're allowed to test a lot more and to make a lot more changes to their bikes to try to help them catch up. And this is with the agreement of the other manufacturers. So there's a bit of goodwill there. So Yamaha and Honda are both on the catch up. Now, these teams all have some satellite, what we call satellite or privateer teams. So there are 6 Ducatis on the grid currently. There's 4 Aprilias, 4 KTMs, 4 Yamahas and 4 Hondas. And run the team. So there's some brilliant quirks about this with the customer bikes, because would you believe it or not, last year's championship was not won by the main Ducati team. It was won by a Ducati, but in a privateer an independent team. Yes, they had a full factory spec, but Matt, I find that amazing. This is like Ferrari leasing their car to another team to run, and then that team beating them with it.
Yeah, and this is how it's different to Formula One. This would be like McLaren. This would be like McLaren letting, I don't know, another Mercedes team. Help me out here. I can't think of anymore.
Yeah, Aston.
It's Mercedes, McLaren. It would be like McLaren giving Aston their exact car and saying, yeah, sure, you guys set it up and run it, but you can have our aero, you can have our power unit, which comes from Mercedes. Mm-hmm. The McLaren thing does kind of spoil it a little bit, but it's not the same at all because they're getting the exact same bike as the factory riders are getting. And the team is what's making the difference. And the rider is what's making the difference there. So it allows, again, for just closer competition. And if you can't afford this year's, well, guess what? You can get last year's. And last year's is actually probably pretty good. We saw last season, the 23 Ducati edge out the 24 on a couple of occasions. Now, granted, there was a very talented rider also involved in that, but it leaves open the door for even what we would think of in Formula One as back markers. Imagine if Sauber could finish on a podium, and like that's a real possibility almost every weekend in MotoGP. It's just it's very different in a very good way.
Absolutely, yes. It's just like Sauber hiring this year's Ferrari and taking the fight to them. Like, it's absolutely amazing. I absolutely love that. So, but of course, these bikes are nothing without the riders sitting upon them. And the riders, they're the stars of the show here. This is where bike racing, for me, like, massively differs from car racing. It's the heroism, the characters, and the risk that they take. The absolute bravery. In a car, yes, car racing, all motorsport is dangerous. But in a car, you're cocooned in carbon fibre. Yes, Formula One's dangerous, and very, very happy and happy to say that drivers rarely get injured, and they have some big old crashes and rarely get injured. But in MotoGP, the riders make a mistake, they are being flung through the air at hundreds of miles per hour, and they have some big, big crashes. So, Matt, the thing that astonishes me is the heroism and the bravery on display.
What astonishes me is their ability to have absolutely no memory about all the bad things that have previously happened to them. I just, so I'm going to start with this because probably a lot of people listening have at one point or another climbed into a go-kart. Now, go-karts are a good comparison because first of all, there are no seat belts. Second of all, the ground is right there. And third of all, I'm sure everyone can think about the first time they climbed into a go-kart and you go screaming into go through some downhill twisty section. You're just like, that's so fast. All right. Imagine being in a go-kart that's going over 200 miles an hour. Now remove two of the wheels and that's MotoGP. That's what they're looking at into their fastest turns. It's just amazing. And plenty of people have also been on a bicycle. So you know what two wheels are like. You know how unstable that can be. And for them to just find the absolute limit of performance, and just get there so rapidly too. It doesn't take them long to be full on the limit. In fact, again, I'm going to bring up tires a little bit, but part of the reason they have to be is because that's the only way to make the bikes work. The brakes aren't warm enough. The tires aren't warm enough. Nothing works right if you don't go fast enough. So it encourages, you almost have to have that kind of approach to it in order to make the bikes work. And then, oh my goodness, like I can't even imagine the forces like under braking and in turns because they're pulling multiple G's. And they're sliding their entire body sometimes along the asphalt.
Yeah, it's crazy. That's the actual. You can watch this, and this is what separates out like some of the riders. They have visible, notable differences in riding styles, and it really comes on. They're all over the bike. They're having to climb all over it, and in Formula One, if you painted all the cars the same color and all the helmets the same color, I don't think anybody you'd really struggle to tell who's who and what riders are which. If you did the same in MotoGP and did all the helmets, the leathers the same colour and the bikes the same colour, you could easily pick out a few of the main riders and the main starters. You say, well, that's Jorge Martin, that's Marc Marquez, that's Pecco Bagnaia. So, and it's absolutely amazing. And yeah, they're rubbing various body parts on the ground frequently, voluntary or involuntary sometimes. And that's when it comes in. They all crash over the season. They all push over the limit. People they slide the bikes. You can see the black lines coming off the tyres, and they're pushing sometimes over the limit and holding the bike up on their elbows or their shoulders. It's mesmerising to watch. But you know, if you're anxious and a bit faint-hearted, maybe MotoGP is not the sport for you, because the amount of times last year I was having to watch through my fingers thinking, I can't believe he's taking that many risks. He's surely going to have a massive crash and hurt himself. That's going to happen soon. And injuries do play a part in MotoGP. And this is where I go about the heroism and the bravery. So more often than not, it plays a big part in the championship that someone will fall off, they'll get hurt, and they'll have to ride with broken bones or ride through the pain barriers to try to keep their championship hopes alive. And so we'll talk about some of the riders now, and what better place to start on this subject than the defending champion, the Spanish guy Jorge Martin. Sensationally won the championship last season he had a full factory Ducati, but in a privateer team, in an independent team. It wasn't the main factory team, and managed to nab the championship off them, won the championship. But he's actually moved to a new team now, and he's now moved on to the Aprilia. So he's trying to get used to his new bike. 12 laps into testing, he has a massive crash, breaks his right hand, breaks his left foot, flies back to Barcelona, has some surgery. He's missed all of testing. It's the round one of the championship, we should say, this weekend coming up, and he was waiting to come and ride this weekend. And we've just found out before recording this show that he has had a training crash, fallen off and broken his other hand as well. So more surgery, 2 broken hands, 1 broken foot. His championship defence has already been blighted by injury before it's even started. And this stuff can happen in MotoGP. Riders can have little spills, but more often than not, you'll see them ride with some pretty hideous injuries. And that moves us on to our next superstar, our next rider, and that is, if you've been around motorsport, you must have surely heard the name Marc Marquez. He is the current megastar of MotoGP, widely regarded as one of the GOATs, if not the GOAT. He has had some horrendous injuries, a crazy comeback story. He's a controversial figure. Not everyone is a fan of Marc Marquez. He does cut a very controversial figure. We'll more on that a bit later. He's very aggressive. He kind of moved the sport on. He started dragging his elbows, very aggressive style. You can easily see his riding style, which Jorge Martin has copied a little bit. Jorge Martin is one of these riders who leans off and drags his shoulders quite a lot. Marquez has been known to perform absolute miracles, and it should be fireworks this season, because we'll move on to the next rider who's a megastar as well, and that's Francesco Bagnaia, or everyone knows him as Pecco Bagnaia, or Pecco. He's a double champion. He narrowly lost out to Jorge Martin last year. He's on the Ducati, and if you're going to compare Bagnaia to Marquez, I'd say it's more like the Prost and Senna sort of comparison. Them two are teammates this year. That's surely going to be fireworks. So Bagnaia, more of a gentleman rider, considered very fast, very good at leading from the front. Leading the Yamaha fight is Fabio Quartararo, the Frenchman, a former world champion himself. He's stuck on the Yamaha, which hasn't been the best bike, and he's trying to lead their resurgence back up. An amazing rider to keep an eye on. And talking of amazing riders, we had rookie sensation, the Spaniard Pedro Acosta, who burst onto the scene like a precocious talent, doing crazy things on the KTM bike, which probably didn't deserve to put it where he put it a lot last year. He crashed a lot, but wow, he wowed us along the way. Everyone's tipping him to be the next Marc Marquez. You've got some other notable mentions. You've got Marco Bezzecchi, who's really good, and joined Aprilia, Luca Marini, Johan Mir, who's another former world champion. The field is stacked with talent and amazing riders, and loads of them have won Grand Prix and races as well, so anybody could win. And with those 6 Ducatis on the grid, which are all capable of winning, there's going to be some absolute drama coming next season, and that's what we'll move on to next then, Matt. Let's talk about a bit of the drama and intrigue and why you should watch MotoGP this coming year and watch the first race next weekend, because one of the highlight things we're going to look out for, and this is why Marc Marquez can be quite controversial, that Marc Marquez is Pecco Bagnaia's teammate in the factory Ducati team. Now, why is that a thing? Well, Years ago, you may have heard of somebody called Valentino Rossi. Marc Marquez and Valentino Rossi were good friends and they were battling hard. They fell out spectacularly, absolutely spectacularly. And ever since then, there has been a war going on between them. Up until last year, Rossi was still having a go at Marc Marquez. Now, Rossi's not riding anymore, but he does own a team, and he also has a rider academy, the VR46 Academy. Pecco Bagnaia was his rider in the academy. So Valentino Rossi is Pecco Bagnaia's mentor. He hates Marc Marquez. Marc Marquez and Pecco Bagnaia are now teammates. It's Spain versus Italy in the factory team. And Matt, surely it's all going nicely at the moment, but surely this is going to go sour and there are going to be some fireworks.
Well, yeah, and this is the thing that I'm really looking forward to. Like a little bit of, from my point of view, the inside baseball here is Marquez is someone who is very rapid out of the gate. Bagnaia is someone who starts on a Friday and reaches their peak on a Sunday. And right now, it seems the bike, which, do we even want to get into that? The bike they're riding this season seems to favor Marquez at the moment. But we saw Ducati last season with Bagnaia take a bike that was not always the greatest and engineer it into near perfection to the point of being able to make up for all the issues they'd had early season. And so right off the bat, you have these two different riders and you have the best engineers on the grid that are just going to put them closer and closer together. And even though Bagnaia is a gentleman, at least off the track, you know, if he gets a sniff of that championship, he's going for it all the way. So even if no one else comes close to the factory Ducati team, you've already got fireworks. This is like a Rosberg and Hamilton 2016 season we're talking about. For those of you, maybe that's a good analogy to make.
That is very good. This is turbocharged, and there is history there. I mean, the two riders tend to get on with each other. There seems to be a healthy respect between them. They did clash last year. They did knock each other off last year. But there was no bitter words really between them. But the Rossi versus the Marquez camp is bitter and deep running. There is such a huge subplot here, and this is why I love MotoGP. There's it's a lot more sort of how do you put it, press sanitized than Formula One sometimes. I think there's a lot more sort of individual characters. There's a bit more of a solo individual character. So there's a cauldron, that's a boiling pot, and surely, Matt, like I think it's going to go swimmingly mid-season until they knock each other off, and then it's going to go sour and be just absolute drama.
Yeah, and again, we have from last season, those of you who didn't watch last season, you have unlike Formula One, where Oscar Piastri will be told to get out of the way, that is not how they do things in MotoGP at all. Because we saw Bagnaia's teammate,
Bastianini.
I was thinking the Beast, because thank you, Jules, for that. Jules being one of our other panel members who always calls him the Beast. Very much kind of being in the way on occasion, and
no team orders.
That's just the way it was. If you couldn't get around him, that was a Pecco problem. That was not a Beast problem. And so you won't see the same kind of, like you say, hierarchical top-down control of the riders. It will be, if it's a battle, it's a real battle. And if someone crosses a line, oh yeah, no one is going to forget that anytime soon. And it's going to be drama all season.
Absolutely. And there's no direct radio to the rider. They get some text messages to their dashboard, but there's generally, the gloves are off. Well, when the gloves are put on, the gloves metaphorically come off, and it is down to the rider and the individual then how they go about their racing. And we've seen this lots of times in history that can result in absolute fireworks.
Well, we can. And this is the thing. I always love this. As a former cyclist, everyone's like, well, it's a non-contact sport. I'm like, you've never been in a peloton, have you? Even at the speeds they ride, they will be leaning on each other through turns, and oh yeah, just it's hard to express the amount of skill and just the ability to work with each other to not have these crashes that goes on while they're fighting for with everything they have for these championships. And yeah, Marquez is a genius. Bagnaia is just indefatigable. He will not stop. He's like a diesel locomotive. And the two of them this season are going to be amazing to watch. And we're just scratching the surface of all the storylines here. That's the best part.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's so many storylines. So as we mentioned before, we've got Jorge Martin, the defending champion, on a new bike, which is pretty quick, the Aprilia, looking to defend his championship with injuries, so he's going to be coming back. We've got Yamaha, who is seeking redemption and looking quick again in testing. You have the brilliance of Acosta, the breathtaking moves he'll put on people on that KTM. But those customer Ducatis, basically they're all going to be running, all 6 Ducatis are going to be running a very similar spec bike. So the customers this year are going to be in a chance of winning races. So there's going to be other teamers. And one little mention, Marc Marquez has his brother, Alex Marquez, on one of those customer Ducatis. So Jules has been saying you think there might be a bit of a family team play skullduggery going on there as well. So there's so many subplots. We've got rookies in the thing. We've got rookies on difficult bikes. There's going to be quite a lot of crashes, quite a lot of spectacular action. But we've got those 6 Ducatis, which we all know can win a race. We've got the Aprilia and the KTMs all capable of nabbing a race win, and everyone fighting for every inch of the tarmac. So that is going to be, it's going to be a brilliant show that you don't want to miss. So where can you watch MotoGP? So if you're in the UK, unfortunately, it is behind a bit of a paywall. It's on TNT Sports. If you have TNT Sports, great. And it's also on Discovery Plus if you have that. But if you don't have them, don't worry. There is a free-to-air channel, Quest. And they're actually showing all of the sprint races on Saturday live. And they'll be showing highlights of the main races as well in the evenings. I'm not sure when. So that's always an option on free-to-air. Or you can go directly on the internets and you can buy the MotoGP video pass and watch loads of documentaries, all the previous seasons and all of the live action, every single second of it. But the age-old adage says, where there's internet, there's always a way. So there is an awful lot to look forward to this season, and we hope that you'll give MotoGP a chance after listening to this. Hopefully we have done enough of a carrot dangle or a little bit of a enticing to get you along for the ride. We'll be bringing race review shows for every round, so we'll hope you'll jump on with us, and thank you for listening to Mr. Apex MotoGP.